Damon, congratulations, first of all, on winning the Booker Prize. You have mentioned that you had a sort of first attempt at this book and then you went away to write some film scripts, and it was that helped you to come back and finish this book. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because it's really clear when you read the book, there is this sort of filmic feel to it.
Yeah, it was something I was offered. It's not, something I regularly do, breaking away to write a film script or two. It came at the right time. For me personally, because I needed money, and also creatively, because the least important thing in a film script is the language. Basically, the actors will change your words, and no one has respect for your immortal dialogue. So it's very freeing in that respect. But it was freeing in another respect for me, because when I returned to the novel, the kind of rather stodgy approach that I'd been taking till then sort of fell away, and I saw what could be done narratively if I continued to use the logic of film. So basically, not to overstress the point, but the narrator of the book behaved like a camera would. And I saw that you could swoop around from one scene to another, one character to another, that you could cut, even from one location to the next. It gave me a freedom in the narration that had been sorely lacking until then. So it was a revelation and a liberation.
It's an amazing experience for the reader, because you are constantly surprised. You're always asking questions because you're wondering where you are, whose viewpoint you're getting, and also who this is being addressed to. And so there are sort of many things about the narration of this book which I find really fascinating. But also the narrative voice is quite distinctive, and it feels impish at times. It's got a sense of humour to it, and I was really intrigued to know who it might be who's speaking, and also who they're speaking to.
Well, I mean, of course, I'm the person behind the voice, so, effectively it's me speaking, but obviously I'm playing a game with that. It seems to me that every story is told by somebody. And whereas, it's sort of an expected part of the technique in the well-made novel that you make your narrator somewhat invisible, like a pane of glass through which the reader's supposed to be looking at the action. In this case, I try to draw the reader's attention to the fact that there is a narrator, and that the entire exercise is artificial. So, to answer the second part of your question, the narrator is not a steady presence. At different times, I had the sense that the narrator was almost a different person, or sometimes a non-person addressing, the human beings in this drama. But that the narrator was also not only speaking about or to the characters in the story, but sometimes to the reader. There's certain key points in the book where the narrator, as it were, wheels around and sticks a finger out of the page at the reader and says something accusing, hopefully, at certain key moments to make the reader feel uncomfortable and implicated in what's going on.
You've picked these periods of time. Each section of the book is separated by roughly 10 years. Were you very careful, presumably, about picking which periods of time you were going to be setting the novel?
Well, yeah, once I decided that it wasn't going to be just about this family and the funerals, but if you widened the window a little bit, you would see something of South Africa in the background. Once I'd made that decision, it sort of became crucial to pick the right moment, because each decade has its own sort of historical ethos, if you like, and I wanted to sort of capture that without naming political parties or being dry and dusty. So, for example, in the Mandela era, the Rugby World Cup, the match that we won was a an obvious candidate as a kind of symbolic moment, because it encapsulated how the nation felt in a sort of unreal and heady way. It was part of the trick of it, because I also, maybe less visibly, had to find an incident for each section that took place in a different season. It may not, as I say, be obvious to a reader, but I'm using 4 different seasons as a backdrop, also to kind of convey the passage of time, which I found, or at least I hope I found multiple ways to sort of evoke in in the writing.
The promise of the title is a promise made by one character to give the house and the land that their black servant has been living in to them on her passing, and it's a promise which is neglected through the decades. And of course, the book seems to me to be very much about land and ownership and property and who owns it, and that's something that has been changing throughout South African history, and is still a big bone of contention now.
Oh, it's a huge flashpoint. Yeah, it's become a big ideological rallying point for certain populist elements in the political landscape right now. I mean, for obvious reasons, because it's an issue that goes right back to the arrival of the first white settlers in South Africa. Land was effectively taken from people who were already living on it, with a sort of careless impunity that suggested nobody was there. The resulting conflict, you could say, underpins all of South African history one way or another. And it's not resolved, not settled. So yeah, it was a sort of obvious theme and subject to try to weave through this particular story, which I hope, in a much more immediate way, centers on the family and their travails.
You've spoken about how the character of Salome, the black servant, is purposefully left almost silent throughout the book, their voice unheard. It's a point made very clearly in the book, and it really does hit home. But I wonder, were you ever worried about doing that, about making that character virtually silent?
Well, sure. I mean, it's obviously going to be questioned. And it was something I sat with for a while. I mean, I did have this idea that maybe I would withhold her inner life until right at the end, and then sort of open the gates and let it flood out, as it were. For better or for worse, I decided not to go that route, but to use one of those moments where the narrator turns and points a finger at the reader and says, if you don't know about this person, perhaps it's because you didn't care to know, you didn't care to ask, which is certainly an accusation that could be made against white South Africans. I guess I was speaking more to them in that instant than to perhaps the British readers.
It also strikes me that the book has a very corporeal focus, I'm going to call it. There is so much stuff in here about the human body. Obviously, we attend 4 funerals and we learn something about the deaths of the people, but also there are elements of talking about people aging, people having or not having children. And looking back at your work, this is something that you have sort of covered before. Is it fair for me to say that you do seem very interested in the human body and how it changes over time? I
mean, we all have one, and we're all, kind of bound to it. I was struck actually by something from one of Christopher Hitchens's memoirs, where he said, it's not true that one has a body, one is a body. But the underlying theme of this book is aging and mortality. The terminus, very obviously with the funerals, is death. That means the end of the body shutting down. So perhaps in this book more than in others, the body is much more present, and I keep, drawing the reader's attention to its functions and its failings. It's certainly something I'm more and more aware of as I get older.
And finally, the Booker. Obviously, you had been shortlisted twice before. Some would say that there was an inevitability about you winning it eventually, but I'm sure it never felt like that to you. But also, you've spoken about there's this sort of the cruel thing that can happen with the Booker, which is that you feel very much like a winner until, of course, the winner is announced, and then the other shortlistees disappear in a mist. And having experienced that twice, I wonder how it now feels, of course, to be that final winner at the end of it all.
Well, I mean, quite honestly, I was braced for it to happen again. I'd made all sorts of plans for people I was going to see after the third, and suddenly I just don't have time to see them. Of course, it feels fantastic. It's a great position to be in. Certainly, didn't seem to me an inevitable result ever. I'm still somewhat stunned, to be honest. I mean, I'm still coming to terms with it, because it is without doubt a life and career-changing event, but the full implications of that are not yet clear.
Well, Damon, it's a fantastic book. I had so much pleasure in reading it, and even more pleasure in talking to you about it, so thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.